Hello there. My name is Ziad Muhammad. All right, so what I'm doing here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have a guide. This is an attempt from myself, a med student in Judgean University, to make sense of the anatomy I'm learning in school in a different way than the professor does it. So currently I'm completing a course called Systematic Anatomy, and I am learning about it. Today was my first lecture, so I make this video right after I learned about it, right after I took the lecture, I went home, I studied it, and now I'm making the video. So this is an attempt from a med student, not a professional, a med student, to make sense of what I am doing, what I'm learning, and try to get you through the journey with me. So we'll start by the skeletal system today. So systematic anatomy, like I said, is a big idea, and we go into smaller ideas. You'll find me do this a lot, going from big ideas to smaller ideas, from big parts of the body to smaller parts of the body. This, in my opinion, is the best way of learning. You'd go from big to small, to small, to small. So yeah, the skeletal system is what I'm talking about today. So the skeletal system, actually, the study of the skeletal system is called osteology and arthropology. Arthrology, sorry. Osteology is a study of bones, and arthrology is a study of joints. So the skeletal system, basically, generally, the skeletal system are just all the bones in the body. It's as simple as that. And arthrology are the joints. What are joints? Joints are, okay, when there are two bones that are meeting in one place, the joint is the meeting point between two different bones. Clear? Okay, now let's get that out of the way and start talking about the bones, what we'll be talking about today. But again, this is a big idea, so this wouldn't be the title of the video by any way. So all I know is that there are 206 named bones in the body. And I also got to know that they're divided into two parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So let's have a look at the axial skeleton, which we will be discussing today. So here's a picture of the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton is also divided among itself into two parts, the trunk and the skull. The trunk is basically this part here, I'm showing it with the mouth, and the skull is just the skull, the head, the bones in the head. So today also we'll be talking about the trunk, which gets me to show you this picture. This is a general picture of the trunk, and today I'll also be talking about the bones of the trunk, not everything in the trunk. I'll be only talking about the bones of the trunks, excluding the joints of the trunk. This will be another video. So the bones of the trunk. If we go deeper into the bones of the trunk, we find out that they're divided into three major parts, major bones, I'd say. We have the vertebrae, we have the costal bone, and we have the sternum. The vertebrae, the first one, I would say it's the backbone of the body and of the trunk. So here's a picture of the vertebrae, which I will be starting with. The vertebrae looks something like this, and it's divided into five minor, I'll say, parts. We have the cervical, which are 7 vertebrae stacked together. We have the thoracic vertebrae, which are 12. We have the lumbar vertebrae, and we have the sacrum, which are 5 that are fused together, and lastly we have the Coccyx. So we'll be going through them one by one. So the first one is a cervical. We have 7 cervical vertebrae, and this is how it looks like from the outside, and it has 2 special characteristics that makes it different from the lumbar and the thoracic vertebrae. The first one is that it has 2 special vertebrae, which are called the atlas and the axis. Where they're located, they're C1 and C2. They're the first 2 vertebrae of the backbone. So the atlas looks something like this, and we will see the difference. We'll see how this one is differentiated from the other bone, from the other vertebrae later on. So this is a general view of it. It has a transverse foramen, which is the opening in the transverse process. It also has a vertebral foramen. This one is in all of the vertebrae, so we'll not be discussing it much. The second special bone is called the axis, which is a C2 bone. This one is also a little special from the other bone because it contains that dens, D-E-N-S. It's just this extra bone on top of here. Now, what also the other special characteristic, I said it has 2 special characteristics. It contains the atlas and axis. The other one is that it looks like this. It looks a little bit different from the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae, and this is because it has 2 foramens on its sides that the lumbar and thoracic vertebrae don't have. It has a transverse foramen, which, like I mentioned, is only special to this kind of vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae. Next up, we have the thoracic vertebrae. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, and that's just how they look generally. I'm not getting so much deeper into that. This is the way it looks. It has a transverse costal fovea. This is also something special about it. And this one, if you could see here, in the transverse process, it does not have the transverse foramen in here. It does not have that hole that the other one had. That's why it's different from it. And that leads me to the lumbar, because the lumbar looks almost similar to the thoracic vertebrae, except it has an extra process called the mastoid process and the accessory process. Those are two extra, I would say, come out, if you want to put this simply, out of the other one. And lastly, we have the sacrum and the coccyx. They are basically vertebrae that are fused together. So you could say that they're vertebrae, or you could say that they're something special rather than being vertebrae. And that's how they look generally. That's how the sacrum looks, and the coccyx looks right under it. Here I just have the same picture because that just pretty much sums it up for what I've learned today. Okay, now that takes me to a smaller idea, another smaller idea which I want to get into, which is the costal bone. The costal bone, another name for it are the ribs. Very, very familiar with it, very simple. The ribs, that's just how the ribs looks like. They're there to protect your inner organs, and they're tied to the sternum, which I'll get to next, by the costal cartilages. Those are the ones here. But this is part of the joint, so I'll discuss it in the next video. And yeah, there are 12 ribs, 7 true ribs, and from 8 to 12 are false ribs, and we have floating ribs, which do not connect to the sternum. Now, next up, I'll have the sternum. Sternum is basically this bone here, the bone that all the ribs connect to in the front of the body, and I believe it's in front of the heart. Yeah. And that's just how it looks. And if you notice here, you're gonna find many notches. The first costal notch, second costal notch. All those notches, all those notches are basically where the ribs would meet the sternum. So that's it. That's all I have for today. This is a very general view of the bones of the trunk. I did not get deeper into each bone. I would recommend for you to start reading more about this, to start getting into the bones, to keep up with all of the names within the bones, for example, the vertebrae names, the vertebrae parts names. And I would recommend, actually, when you're studying, I would recommend you drawing them. I'm very bad at arts, but I drew it and it looks like shit, but I still did it anyways. And yeah, that's it. All right. Thank you for listening. I hope that was helpful.